So the entire time that Joe Biden was in office, the only thing Republicans wanted to talk about was his mental status and his cognitive decline. And if Joe Biden stuttered for 1 second, if he misspoke one time, if he stumbled one time, or hesitated before he spoke one time, they would hold it under a microscope and talk about it day in and day out. And mainstream media would play reel after reel after reel of every little slip up Joe Biden ever had. And now that Donald Trump is in office, they've got the presidency, they've got the Supreme Court, they've got the Senate, they've got the House. You would think that they would be talking about how great America is, but they can't do that. They can't be talking about that. What they have to talk about is go back and play this old worn out hit, which is let's talk about Joe Biden's mental health. And the Senate is literally having hearings to talk about Joe Biden's cognitive decline. And folks, they're doing this because they want to distract from the train wreck that is Donald Trump right now. They're doing absolutely anything and everything they can to distract people. So they're going back and playing this old, tired, worn out hit. One that I am so tired of hearing about. I was tired of hearing about it the entire time Joe Biden was in office, and I sure as hell am tired of hearing about it now. That we are knee deep into one of the most extreme, radical, authoritarian regimes we have ever seen in American history, and people still wants to go back and pick at a bone about Joe Biden. And what exactly are you going to get out of this other than distracting people? What are you actually going to get? What are you going to win? If you determine, oh, he was mentally unfit, well, then what do you get out of the deal? And how does it change where we're at right now? How does it change what Donald Trump is doing right now as we speak? But one person we can always count on to just bring the truth and bring common sense is Jasmine Crockett. And I want to play a couple of clips here of her talking about Joe. And she just makes the point that I've always made, which is I would much rather have an old granddad working alongside me who might be a little slower than to have someone who is an outright psychopath. Take a look at Jasmine.
I never saw anything in Joe Biden that made me wonder whatsoever. And it's not that I was with Joe Biden every single day, that's for sure. But as I talked about my grandparents, the way that I would describe Joe is like, I mean, he's a granddaddy, right? And so like, the way that my granny was when she was younger versus ultimately kind of where she was at 81 when she ended up passing away, mentally she was still there, but like her attitude about certain things, like whether or not she was looking to be as polished or cared to be as polished, or even if she moved as fast, it just wasn't there. We all slow down. But I will tell you that I will take a broken, or however they want to describe Joe Biden, over Donald Trump any given day. Because number one, I know Joe Biden's heart. And I can tell you that when you look at the legislation that he was able to push forward with, this wasn't legislation that was about him and his rich friends. It was legislation that was for the good of the American people.
That's so true. Joe Biden's entire presidency was about the American people. He came in after Donald Trump completely bungled the pandemic and the country was completely circling the drain at that point. I sometimes wonder where we would be today if Donald Trump had got reelected. Where would we be if he had been able to continue going down the dangerous road that he was going down back then? I mean, I know right now he's going completely off the rails like we've never seen before, and some people may be saying, well, at least Brando, we'd be rid of him if he had of won back in 2020, but I don't know that we would have ever been rid of the guy, and I still can't sit here with all the confidence in the world and tell you that we're going to have a midterms or tell you that we're going to have another election. And I know a lot of people say I'm being hyperbolic when I say those things, but we have saw him completely shred the Constitution and ignore every court in the land, including the Supreme Court, when he wants to. So I have no faith in the guy is all I'm saying. I have no faith whatsoever. At least when we had Joe Biden, what he was putting out there was for the good of the American people. His policies was for the good of the American people, and he wasn't setting up late night just randomly tweeting all this madness and sowing as much division as he could. He was just quietly going about his job and working for the good of the American people, and I respect the hell out of that, and that's the type of president I want. But I love what Jasmine says in this next portion of the clip where she talks about the type of people that Joe Biden surrounded himself with, because there's a whole lot of people out there that would say, oh, well, he wasn't really running the show. Okay, let's go ahead and say that he wasn't. Let's just give them that. I know he was, but let's just go ahead and say he wasn't running the show. At least he surrounded himself by people who was getting shit done and not this circus we're seeing now. But take a look at what Jasmine had to say about this.
And when you look at the people that he surrounded himself with, even if you're saying that there was a mentally deficient Joe Biden, I know that he absolutely had a mental acuity that is supreme when it comes to comparing him to Donald Trump, because at least he kept good people around him. He kept people that would keep us safe in this country. He kept people that would make sure that even as tensions were rising all around the world, that we were keeping those tempered. He was able to understand with his level of mental acuity who our friends were. He was not getting us into unwarranted tariff wars and things like that. So even if we want to say, which I refuse to accept, that Joe Biden was mentally deficient, let me tell you something. His mental deficiency is still 1,000 times better than what we currently have. And so, I just wish that ultimately this country would judge each of our leaders with the same measuring stick. We do not. There was a lot of pressure that was put on Joe Biden. There were a lot of criticisms that were lodged at him as well as Kamala Harris.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Donald Trump is batshit insane, and it's insulting to my intelligence or anyone's intelligence when they go out there and try to paint it as though he's playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. No, he is a pigeon who is walking around the board shitting all over it and thinking that he won. That's what Donald Trump is. And to compare him with Joe Biden and talk about Joe Biden's mental decline, and to be talking about it now when we see our country literally just coming unglued at the seams, we see democracy coming completely off the rails and off the hinges, and you want to go back and you want to pick on Joe Biden's mental health. That's the argument, and that's the conversation they want to have. Well, that's the conversation they had the entire time he was in office, because he was an effective president who was leading, and they couldn't talk about that. They had to find a way to demonize what he was doing, so they did it the entire time he was in office. And now that they have their pigeon in there shitting all over the board and thinking that it won, they have to figure out how to go back for him. And what's so crazy to me about it is they will sit here and they will go to bat for every insane thing that Donald Trump says and does. They will try to same wash it and normalize it. And I really sometimes would love to be a fly on the wall right before they start talking. I would love to hear them talking about, okay, how are we going to spin this now? I guess, especially J.D. Vance, because I will say this about J.D. Vance. I don't think that J.D. Vance is stupid. I think J.D. Vance is somebody who saw the grift and got in on it. I think that Project 2025 wanted him there and wanted him in this position. I still don't think he likes Trump deep down. I really don't. And I guarantee you he's probably sitting there going, okay, how am I going to spin this? He just looked like a flaming idiot, but how am I going to spin it? But here's the thing. They will work overtime to spin it. They will work overtime to spin every batshit insane thing that Donald Trump says. And meanwhile, people couldn't figure out how to sell what Joe Biden was doing. And Democrats today still can't figure out how to sell their ideas. They still can't figure out how to sell it and reconnect with the working class. And to me, it's very simple. You remind them that we are the party that gave you voting rights. We're the party that gave you civil rights. We're the party that gave you Medicare and Medicaid. We're the party that every time you was sinking to the bottom, we're the ones that reached in and pulled you up out of it. And more people needs to get back to talking about those things and not be so ashamed to be Democrats, and don't go back picking on Joe Biden's mental health at this point in the game when everything is burning down around us, and you want to talk about that. That's the conversation you really want to have. That tells me that people just wants to distract from everything that's going on. And I will never let them sane wash Donald Trump and his insanity, because that's what it is. You want to talk about mental decline all day? Like Jasmine said, yeah, Joe Biden's an older man. He would tell you that. He's a grandfather. He knows that. We don't have to tell him. But I can tell you that in my lifetime, I would much rather have been surrounded by my grandfathers, and I would much rather be surrounded by my dad today. Every day at some point, I help my dad find his keys. Every day. It's become something that I just know is going to happen as the day goes on. He's going to lose his keys. He's going to lose his wallet. He's going to lose his phone. I'm going to have to help him find it. My dad very well may be in the same early stages, and we recognize it, and we talk about it. And we've even talked about me having an app on my phone to where if he drives past the house and doesn't make it back, I can at least figure out where he's at. But you want to know the truth? I would much rather have that old man standing behind me any day of the week than to have a batshit dictator just running wild. So when I look back at Joe Biden's presidency, I look back at it for the effective presidency that it was, and I look back at it as a presidency that saved us when we were literally dying. That's how I will always view it. Was he the greatest president of all time? I think time will tell. I think he's in the argument. I think he's at the top of the conversation. I think anyone, especially my age, if you sat down and said who was the greatest president of your lifetime, if people would be honest with it, Joe Biden's in the top of that list. But I will always look back at his accomplishments. I will always look back at what he did. And I will always look back at the people who spent every minute talking about his cognitive decline and talking about every word he stuttered before he said or hesitated before he said or every little slip. They held him under that microscope. And I just view that as, it's not even anything I want to entertain a conversation about. Because when someone comes at me with Joe Biden's decline, no, Joe Biden pulled this country up when we were literally dying and kept us on track. And now we're sitting here with this maniac in charge, and people are saying-washing that. And I'm never going to let them saying-wash it. The things that Donald Trump says and does is absolutely insane. And it's just, he's definitely, without a doubt, the most cold-hearted leader that we've ever seen. Doesn't do anything to bring people together. Doesn't do anything to mend a fence. He just lights every bridge on fire and sits back and laughs at it. And somehow he duped evangelicals into being assholes like that too. Somehow he duped ministers in my part of the world, ministers who baptized me and who I used to look up to and think were good men. He managed to baptize them with his stupid ass Maga-ism and completely brainwashed them into being dickheads. And so I'm always going to call that stuff out. And I will take that old man. I would take Joe Biden back today. I would take Joe Biden if he had stayed in the race and won and came out and said, hey guys, I've got this severe prostate cancer going on right now. I would say, you know what? I'll keep you before I'll keep that maniac. Because after January 6th, that was the ultimate deal breaker for me. I've never wanted to hear another word out of Donald Trump's mouth since that day, and I never will. So if Joe Biden was in a hospital bed, making decisions from a hospital bed, I would be sitting there saying, let's wait and see what he's going to say, and let's get behind this idea before I would ever entertain the idea of being behind this MAGA madness.